In 1958, inside a factory in Columbus, Georgia, a group of chemists did something no American company had ever dared to do. They removed the sugar. Not from a test batch, not from a lab experiment, from a full-scale production line, shipping nationwide to millions of Americans who had never once asked for it. The machines ran, the bottles filled, the trucks loaded out, and Royal Crown Cola became the first company in American history to mass-produce a diet soda. Their rivals laughed. Coca-Cola didn't follow, Pepsi didn't follow. The entire industry looked at what RC had built and called it a mistake. They were wrong. Within a decade, diet soda became a billion-dollar category. Within 2, it reshaped how an entire country thought about what it drank. But here's the part nobody talks about. RC invented that future, built the machines that made it real, solved every technical problem standing between an idea and a bottle on a shelf, and then lost everything anyway. Not to a better product, not to a smarter formula. They lost to something the factory floor was never built to fight. This is the story of how Royal Crown Cola built one of the most innovative manufacturing operations in American beverage history, and why that was never going to be enough. To understand what RC built, you have to understand the mess it built it inside of. In the early 1900s, American soda was chaos. Dozens of regional colas, inconsistent formulas, bottlers mixing syrup by feel, hoping it came out the same way twice. The industry ran on reputation, not engineering. While Coke and Pepsi were busy building mythology, secret formulas, origin stories, mystique, Royal Crown was doing something unglamorous. They were studying the factory floor. How fast could a line run before quality dropped? What carbonation pressure held taste steady across different water supplies? How do you replicate one syrup blend across 50 plants and get the same cola every time? Not romantic questions, engineering questions. RC answered them better than anyone in the industry. By the late 1930s, Royal Crown had something its competitors didn't, an engineering network that scaled without breaking. The product tasted the same in Birmingham as it did in St. Louis. In an industry built on inconsistency, that was a superpower. And it had a second benefit nobody else could match. Efficient production meant lower cost per case. Lower cost meant a cheaper bottle on the shelf. And a cheaper bottle meant access to the customers Coke and Pepsi weren't chasing. Working-class families, factory towns, the bottom of the market. By the late 1940s, that strategy had made Royal Crown the third largest cola brand in America, behind Coke, behind Pepsi, ahead of every other challenger that had ever tried. And the people running those lines knew it. In Columbus, Georgia, a job on the RC bottling floor meant something. Steady hours, a skill that took years to actually master. Reading pressure gauges, hearing when a fill head was running half a beat off, knowing by smell when a syrup batch had gone wrong before a single bottle came off the line. Fathers brought their sons in. Some bottling families had been running RC equipment since before the war. This wasn't a job people drifted into. It was a trade. But RC wasn't satisfied with third. And inside its labs in the early 1950s, the chemists were chasing something bigger. Sugar costs were climbing, and buried in medical research that hadn't reached the public yet, doctors were starting to connect sugar to weight gain, heart disease, diabetes. Nobody was talking about it in newspapers. RC was listening anyway. Their bet, build a sugar-free cola now, and you'll own a category before the culture even knows it wants one. The obstacle was saccharin. At the concentration needed to sweeten a full cola, it turned bitter, metallic. Every batch tasted like medicine.
The chemists kept going, adjusting ratios, rerunning batches at full line speed, failing, adjusting again. Some weeks the formula seemed close. Then a new batch of saccharin would arrive from a different supplier with a slightly different concentration, and the bitterness would creep back in. There was no shortcut, no way to compute the answer on paper, just batch after batch, taste test after taste test, a small room of chemists drinking flat, warm, half-finished cola samples for years, trying to out-stubborn a molecule that didn't want to behave. It took years, and somewhere in the mid-1950s, it worked. Not in a test cup, on the production line, at scale, every time. Then came the second problem. The existing equipment wasn't built for it. Different viscosity, different fill behavior. RC spent months retrofitting plants, rewriting protocols, retraining supervisors on a syrup that didn't act like anything they'd run before. By 1957, the factory was ready. On January 1, 1958, Royal Crown launched Diet Rite Cola, the first nationally distributed diet soda in American history. The response was immediate. Diet Rite didn't just sell, it sold to people who'd never bought RC before. Health-conscious consumers, diabetics told to avoid sugar, women caught in the first wave of American diet culture. And it wasn't cannibalizing regular RC, it was expanding the whole business. New drinkers buying both. Inside the plants, lines that ran one shift added a second. Syrup production scaled. Distribution pushed into markets RC had never seriously touched. By every operational measure, it was a perfect launch. The cost structure even favored RC. Artificial sweetener was cheaper than sugar, so Diet Rite carried better margins than the flagship cola. Royal Crown had invented a category, proven the manufacturing, proven the demand. They'd shown the entire beverage industry that diet soda wasn't a gimmick, it was a market. And that's the exact moment the story turns. Because the second RC proved the future was real, they handed the blueprint to the two companies built to take it from them. Coca-Cola watched the numbers and didn't panic. They didn't need to. They had something Royal Crown didn't. Distribution that reached every fountain, every cooler, every register in the country, and an advertising machine that had spent decades teaching America to want their product before they even tasted it. Pepsi watched too and made the same calculation. Both giants ran the math and reached an almost identical conclusion. There was no rush. Diet Rite was a niche experiment until proven otherwise, and trademark lawyers on both sides were still nervous about using the word diet on a national product at all. Better to let Royal Crown spend a few more years proving the category was safe, real, and worth the investment, and then walk in and take it. For years, Coke and Pepsi held back, partly trademark caution, partly simple arrogance. RC's factories kept running. Diet Rite kept growing. For a while, it looked like the formula's inventor might actually keep the category it built. It wouldn't last. The economics were always going to turn. By the late 1960s, RC's bottling network, the very system that made its rise possible, became its weak point. Coke and Pepsi started picking off RC's independent bottlers one at a time. Exclusive deals, better margins, equipment financing, marketing support RC couldn't match. Some bottlers resisted out of loyalty. 2 generations running an RC line doesn't disappear easily. There were bottlers who turned down Coca-Cola's offer twice. Men who'd grown up on the factory floor their fathers ran, who said no out of something that wasn't quite business and wasn't quite sentiment either. It was just what you did. You didn't sell out the line your family built.
Others couldn't say no. The economics were too stark. A Coke franchise in the same town was simply more profitable. More volume, better margins, stronger co-op advertising dollars, a sales rep calling every week instead of every quarter. When you're running a factory with payroll due on Friday, economics eventually beats loyalty every time. And nobody who made that switch felt like a villain for doing it. They felt like they were keeping the lights on. Bottler by bottler, territory by territory, the network that had been RC's competitive edge began to come apart, and the same efficiency math that built RC's rise now worked in reverse. Fewer cases meant fixed costs spread thinner. Thinner margins meant slower lines. Slower lines meant cut shifts. Workers felt it before the spreadsheets ever showed it. Then came 1982. Coca-Cola launched Diet Coke, not a quiet regional test, a fully orchestrated, nationally televised launch backed by the biggest beverage ad campaign of its era. Celebrities, primetime spots, fountain placements locked in before the product even existed. Within a year, Diet Coke was the third best-selling soda in the country. The category Royal Crown invented in 1958, the market they spent 22 years building, taken not by a better formula. Blind taste tests of the era showed no consistent preference for Diet Coke over Diet Rite. It was taken by shelf space, advertising budgets, and a distribution machine RC never had the scale to match. In Columbus, Georgia, workers who'd run Diet Cola lines since the early 60s watched their volume numbers shift in real time. Retailers wanted more shelf space for Diet Coke. Supermarket planograms got redrawn. Diet Rite didn't disappear, it just moved. Lower shelf, fewer facings, smaller and smaller, year after year. The factory that invented the category was being pushed to the margins of its own market. What happened after 1982 is the part that's easy to miss because nothing dramatic happened. No bankruptcy, no scandal, no headline. Advertising budgets got cut, gradually, defensively, one campaign at a time. Each cut made sense on a spreadsheet. Volume drops, you protect margin, marketing is a cost. But advertising isn't just persuasion, it's presence. It's the thing that keeps a brand in the active part of a consumer's memory instead of the forgotten part. When RC stopped advertising at scale, it didn't just stop persuading people, it stopped existing in the places where modern buying decisions actually get made. Nobody noticed they were forgetting RC. Forgetting never feels like anything. Inside the plants, the slowdown just kept compounding. Reduced schedules, bottler consolidations, quiet attrition, a shift eliminated here, a retirement not replaced there, a maintenance position left vacant because the line wasn't running enough hours to justify filling it. Men who'd spent 30 years learning the particular rhythm of a single bottling line watched that knowledge become unnecessary, one budget cycle at a time. Nobody got a letter saying the plant was dying. It just got quieter year after year until quiet became normal. By the early 90s, RC's manufacturing footprint was a fraction of what it had been at its peak. Not gone, just hollowed out. Here's what's left. Royal Crown still exists. The formula survives. Diet Rite outlived its own decline by years, longer than anyone would have bet. What doesn't survive is the industrial empire that built it. The chemists who solved a problem nobody else could, the bottlers running plants their families had run for generations, the network that once covered the country. That's gone. And the real lesson here isn't about marketing budgets or boardroom strategy. It's this. Royal Crown built something genuinely excellent and believed excellence would protect it.
It didn't. Because the American market doesn't run on excellence. It runs on familiarity, on the architecture of habit built over decades of advertising and locked-in shelf space. RC built a factory that could make the best Diet Cola in the country. Coca-Cola built a system that made it impossible for anyone else's Diet Cola to matter. One of those is a manufacturing achievement. The other is a different kind of power entirely. And Royal Crown, for all its ingenuity, never closed that gap before it was too late. The bottle still exists. The factory that mattered is gone. And the cola that changed how America drank is remembered, if it's remembered at all, as the one you reach for when everything else is sold out. That's the story of Royal Crown Cola. And that's American Factory Stories.